Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the Focus Ethics weekly session. We will take up the newspaper articles and discuss them from the point of view of the ethics syllabus of our mains exam. The first article that we're going to take up is this: the problems of regulating live-in relationships. We will obviously not talk about the regulations and the policies, but we will talk about the ethical aspect of live-in relationships. Live-in relationships by Supreme Court of India has been legitimized, and Supreme Court of India has said that live-in relationships are at par with marriage. Obviously, the laws of maintenance or adoption will not apply to live-in relationships, but for practical purpose, they should not have the police harassment, and there has to be a respect in the relation and some amount of property rights in case of the death of the husband, even if there was no marriage, but they were in live-in relationships, then the girl will have the property right. So it has been legitimized by the Supreme Court of India. But there has been opinion from the other side that the live-in relationship needs to be controlled. See, we will discuss this article from the point of view of ethics, obviously. And ethics are standards, principles and standards to judge and guide human behavior. So whether we should be living in relationships, live in relationships or not, that would form a standard of society. And that standard has been expanded by the Supreme Court to a couple, two people of opposite gender living together. The permission for that come from the institution of marriage. And marriage requires rituals. And once the rituals are done, only then any physical intimacy is permissible. But there are no rituals in live-in relationships. And that creates a question from traditional morality standpoint that can live-in relationship be legitimized? Can the couple be permitted to live together as intimate partners? That's the question. Supreme Court has said, yes, that can be done, and Supreme Court has given the permission. The Supreme Court effectively has expanded the institution of marriage. There is one fundamental idea in ethics that whatever the standard is, the standards of ethics must be expanded with time. Otherwise, it won't be ethics. One of the aspects about ethics is also that the values in the ethics, the standard of ethics, whether personal ethics or professional ethics or social morality, all the values must remain intact. For example, there are many provisions in the Constitution. In the preamble, there are 4 values: justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And talking of justice doesn't mean that we'll compromise liberty, or talking of liberty doesn't mean that we will compromise equality. And talking of liberty or equality doesn't mean that we will compromise fraternity. Rather, all the values should remain together. That is generally referred to as moral intactness. All the values must remain together. That is the idea of Plato to talk about unity of virtue. Virtues stand together and fall together. So liberty and equality are not antithetical to each other. Talking of liberty also necessitates discussion on equality, and talking of justice necessitates the discussion on all 3. Any one value here is related to the other 3 values. That is the unity of virtue, the idea of Plato. Values stand together and fall together, or in other terms, moral intactness. Now, this is a fundamental idea of ethics. That's how the standard should be. All the values must create space for other values, and they must align with other values, and they must shape the other values. The question is then, when we have traditional morality and we have new modern values coming into India under the influence of globalization, these two obviously will contradict with each other on the face of it. Like the traditional institution of marriage seems to be contradicting with the institution of live-in relationships. So in that case, what is to be done? In that case, the understanding of ethics is that the traditional morality has to expand to include the good elements of the new values, and the new values must respect the good elements of the traditional values. And that's how harmony must be created. And with harmony, the different values must exist together. That is the background. This has to be done in any new culture. It's not just live in relationship. The idea of fast food culture, the rapid pace of the urban mobility and the urban life, that is the status. People leave their house quite early in the morning, and it is not possible to have a cooked food carrying or to have cooked food all the time in the breakfast unless you want to wake up your wife from the middle of the sleep. She slept late because of taking care of children. You are going to the office early. In that case, out of love, you would want your wife to be sleeping and take some rest. In that case, you have to go for the fast food culture. Any new element that has come from globalization will carry some merits, and that must be accommodated in the traditional way of life. Essentially speaking, ethics must be expanded. If it does not, it is not living entity and it will cease to be ethical. It will cease to guide us in the right way. So, with that backdrop, let's discuss the idea of live-in relationship. There are four values mentioned in the preamble, and following that constitutional morality present in the preamble, I shall discuss the live-in relationship vis-a-vis the traditional marriage under four heading. Number one is justice. Justice is giving people their due. That's a sweet and simple definition given by Aristotle. Justice is giving people their due. Now, there are many things which are due to people, many things. One of the fundamental things that is due to a human being is dignity. And dignity comes from the ability to take your own decision, make your own choices. This we have talked about multiple times in the previous videos as well. There's one very important idea of autonomy, complete moral autonomy of individual. That is the idea of Immanuel Kant. That's idea of Rousseau, and to a large extent, that is idea of John Rawls as well. Individual must act as an agency, and they must be completely independent while exercising their choices, without coercion, without undue influence. If we talk about live-in relationship, it gives that autonomy to individual to seek the partner of their choice and live the life meaningfully by having the person compatible to them. That decision must be theirs. That's the idea of autonomy. So live-in relationship helps into this important idea of Kant and Rousseau and also John Rawls, individual autonomy that protects individual from societal, sometimes religious obligations, that gives equal power dynamics between the couples without the social or the legal boundaries. Supreme Court has legitimized it. Supreme Court also has given the property right in live-in relationships. So from that point of view, the idea of justice and autonomy is better inculcated in this institution. If we look for traditional marriages does protect the rights. And from the perspective of John Locke, protection of the rights is the most important aspect for the living of an individual. That has to be done by the sovereign or otherwise. So there is legal protection of the rights. If you desert your wife, if you are willing to give divorce and she accepts the divorce, then you have to give the maintenance. There'll be an amount, alimony that you have to pay. So the rights by law are protected under the traditional marriages because traditional marriages are legally recognized. They're also socially protected because of social recognition. In the traditional marriages, there's structured family support as well. And there is inheritance rights, there is maintenance laws, there's adoption rights, etc., for traditional marriages. So if you look at it, one of the rights, security in a sense of financial security, that is very well protected under traditional marriage, but autonomy that is better protected under live-in relationships. If we talk from the point of view of liberty, John Stuart Mill, he wrote the biggest defense of liberty in his book On Liberty in the Western Philosophy. And there he has given a harm principle. And this is a guiding light for exercising liberty by an individual. The idea of harm principle is that power can be exerted over an individual only to prevent harm to others. The fuller statement of harm principle reads like this: the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. That means as long as the individual is not harming others, then his liberty must not be curtailed by the state or otherwise. The state has no business in interfering with what people are doing. So, if we apply that harm principle of John Stuart Mill in live-in relationships, they seemingly are not harming other members in society. But this harm is not the emotional harm or the sentiment that is heard of families. That is not counted as harm. It has to be a real physical harm. And if that is not being happening, so you have to allow live-in relationships in the interest of protection of liberty. It's a matter of personal choice and consent. And consensual relationships in live-in relations are that be allowed philosophically under the harm principle of John Stuart Mill. In the traditional marriage, if you see, there are institutional constraints. The choice of marriage many a time is not of individual but of the family. There are also sometimes religious and cultural obligations that you have to perform in the marriage. Sometimes that is a structured responsibilities, sometimes that is a stereotyping of the roles. But what you do is the commandments, following the set standards. That is not exercising authentic choice. For all the things that you do, you have not given your consent. So from that point of view, liberty is better protected in live-in relationships. If you look from the other two perspectives of equality and fraternity, equality is gender neutral power dynamics in marriage. If we talk of equality in marriages, and that is the feminist ethics, gender neutral power dynamics, shared decision making, economic independence to both the person, and that may not. It is not assured that this will be there in the live-in relationship, but since it is a consensual marriage, chances are that it would be, but that's not a guarantee. All the live-in relationships are not translated into long-term, successful, stable relations. But if you have the concept of equality in the live-in relationships, you do not assault your partner. You give respect and involve equally in the decision-making your partner, and you allow the economic independence. So if that is a case in live-in relationship or in marriage, then there is a concept of equality. But it is not about the institution that this idea of equality comes from. It's a matter of attitude. And in a society where there's no equality in marriage, there would not be equality in live-in relationships as well. In the traditional marriage, there are defined gender roles, and generally there are institutionalized hierarchies. So in that case, the division of labor exists and there is no equality. But if we have to look for a stable institutions, a more moral institution, whether that is live-in relationship or marriage, there has to be element of equality. Now, I cannot evaluate very clearly that where equality is more, whether in live-in relationships or in marriages, but it may tend to be more in live-in relationships. Actually, it may not be. But since it's a more consensual relations, so maybe the tendency of having equality in the institution would be more in the live-in relationships. If we talk of fraternity, live-in relationship is more individualistic. And the social integration, since the institution doesn't have social legitimacy, although Supreme Court has given it the legal legitimacy, it doesn't carry so much of social legitimacy with itself, and hence there'll be problem with the societal interface, where there's limited social integration of the couples with each other's family and each other's community because of lack of social legitimacy. And that would reduce fraternity in the institution. In the traditional marriages, going with the communitarian ethics, the community integration is very high. Of the couples in the marriage, their community integration is very high. The social support for the couples are also very high when society accepts that form of marriage, their extended family bonding with each other's family. So the traditional family support system that exists in the traditional marriage that increases the element of fraternity. Now, the thing is that there are four aspects here. And from the perspective of protection of their rights, the family wants traditional marriage. From the perspective of fraternity, engagement of each other's community, the family wants traditional marriage. But from the point of view of liberty, individuals would want to exercise their own consent, their own choice, and their own autonomy. So from the point of view of this, the individuals may want live-in relationship. Whether the institution is successful or not, that would depend upon how well all these four has been integrated into that institution. If we talk about, suppose, the traditional institution of marriage, then no doubt the rights are protected both socially and legally. But what about autonomy? If you can fix this problem, that means the parents also give rights, especially to girls, to exercise their right to choice or consent in choosing their partner. And then the problem would be solved to large extent if you can have this autonomy, especially for the girls, in the traditional institution of marriage. And in the traditional institution of marriage, you have equality as well. You remove the gender hierarchies and the prescribed gender stereotyping or the prescribed responsibilities, division of labor around the house. If you remove that and you provide economic independence and shared decision making, then the traditional institution of marriages will not have any problem. Won't have any problem, because of which the young couples, the young people, they are running away from the traditional institution of marriage. And especially the girls have anxiety, and sometimes the boys also, to live with a complete stranger. When you exercise your autonomy and you give your consent and choice, and then the traditional institution of marriage can be improved. Live-in relationships. You see, live-in relationship, people run after liberty. That you have to exercise your personal choice and give your consent to the relations. You have to exercise your full autonomy. But if you improve that and give the rights also to the partner, you don't separate from the partner at the drop of your hat. Any problem happens, she becomes pregnant, and you run away. You run away. So you have no qualms about violating the right of your partner. If you can take care of this in the live-in relationships, if you can take care of this as well, you try to engage with each other's family, and you try to pick up some of the culture. Even if she is or he is from the other culture, you learn the language, you learn the food habits, you learn a little bit of dressing style. And then obviously the society will be more willing to integrate you when there is value alignment, but you take care of this. You try to align your value with the value of your partner's family or the society she lives in. And if you bring that element in live-in relationship, there would be technically no difference between traditional marriage and live-in relationship. If you can have all the four elements in both of them, then they will be really synonymous. Really, practically, they would be synonymous. There are some elements missing currently in the traditional institutions of marriage, and some elements are missing in live-in relationships. And that is the reason some people choose one or the other. If you have all four in both of them, then they would be practically quite the same. So that's the way. Practically, you have to talk about justice. All the four things that's there in the preamble, and in any perspective. If in the context of live-in relationship, there must be contract in relationships, even if it is not legally identified, legally recognized. You must still think of it as a contract that you will not break. So separation should not be that easy in the live-in relationships. You have gone into the contract, and then you have to respect that contract. One of the major problem and criticism of live-in relationship is that couples do not continue the relationship for long. And that's the reason. So the point here is that the contract that will take care of much of the problem and criticism of live-in relationships. Justice as fairness in choice, equal basic liberties. But You have to respect the contract. Within the contract, this should be the characteristic of the contract. J.S. Mill has talked about liberty, and individuals must be given the right to exercise their choices, have personal autonomy. Both institutional, traditional marriages and the live in relationship institution, they both must have it. Martha Nussbaum's capability approach, financial independence, the right to choose an employment of your choice, managing the household responsibilities as well, gender justice, individual dignity, this element that helps to bring equality in any institution or in society must be taken care of in whatever we are discussing. And maybe the idea of Michael Sandel and others of a fraternity, social bonds, community values, moral obligations to fulfill these social bonds and the community obligations. For fraternity, there are many, many ideas that you can gradually pick up. For example, one of the idea of Immanuel Kant, the third categorical imperative of Kant, aligning our end with the end of others. This is an obligation. So when you marry your partner, it is your responsibility actually, not just with your in-laws. This is a very wide spanning idea of Immanuel Kant to align our end with all other people in our society. It's not just about in-laws, but obviously it will apply to in-laws as well. And improving the fraternity actually stabilizes any institution or society. So this is a general framework that you must pick up. If you have to do the ethical analysis of social issues like this, then you can do it from the 4 dimensions. The next article that we are going to discuss is that this news that is picking up since last 2 days. And you must be aware, and you might have stumbled upon the Samay Raina's show, India's Got Latent. And recently, one of the guests on the show, Ranbir Allahabadia, he went there and sort of, I don't know, maybe an excitement of what was it, maybe the ambience there, or maybe sitting beside Samay Rana, that was the impact, some induction from him. I don't know what happened. He was a completely different man there, very different than what he is generally on his own podcast. And he said certain things that has created furor and widespread criticism, and YouTube now has taken that down. This issue raises many concerns. It raises the question of limits on the free speech, the government's role on regulating. FIR has been launched at 3 places against them, and the previous guests as well. This also raises the question of the platform responsibility of modulating the content. Because when the news caught up and the criticism of the show was happening for a while, but for this time, he said something very, very heinous. And the criticism and the opposition is rolling up. And then YouTube has taken the video down. Perhaps, maybe the government has asked it to, or so modo. It's not very clear at this point. But the responsibility of platform is again in the question with this case. Public morality standards. Comedy, no doubt, in the form of satire is very popular and also very effective. But the choice of the words and the language used in the comedy, that is a big question. This roasting culture, roast per se is not bad, but the use of obscene language in that is definitely questionable. And any form of art, even if you call this whole comedy and roasting as art, that must take care of the cultural sensitivity. So let me now present to you some of the ideas of some philosophers regarding comedy or roast. I am not talking about the choice of language of this kind of show, but in general, what are the view of the philosophers and thinkers when it comes to satire or comedy? Plato was not a fan of it. Plato never liked it. He had concerns about degradation of public discourse because of comedy. Plato, in general, did not like arts, any form of arts, because according to Plato, this world is not real. This world is less real, rather. This world is modeled upon the other world, the world of form and ideas. This world is a modeling, this world is imperfect. And when you make an art, suppose you make a statue of a person, the person in this form, in this world itself, himself or herself is imperfect. And when you make a statue of the person, that is a copy of the copy. That is imperfection of imperfection. So the person in this form is a second hand thing. And when you make a statue, you make that a third hand thing. So he used to say that the arts are doubly removed from reality. So it's not just satire or comedy, it's just the opinion of Plato overall for the arts that would lead to degradation of public discourse, impact on youth and morality. And he asked the state to actually throw out all these artists and comedians from the state. And he requested or he developed the provision for high handedness in this regard and the absolute power of the philosopher king for censorship of such contents. Aristotle, little more moderate in this regard compared to Plato, had said that catharsis, meaning intense emotion, may require satire or comedy. But there is limit to which you can do social mockery going by his golden mean principle. And humor must not deviate you from virtues. The mean path has to be adopted. Comedy should not lead to permanent harm. You should not roast, in the modern context, if we talk about, you should not roast anyone that damages a person psychologically or break down the relationships. That shouldn't be the purpose of comedy. The purpose of comedy must be to express the feelings, must be to do criticism of some policies of or the position of government that otherwise in straightforward manner you cannot reflect that. Catharsis cannot come. That intense emotion in the plain language may not come. That can come through comedy. The comedy should have that purpose, according to Aristotle, and not other. That the present comedians and the sometimes people who do roast, they go in a different direction. John Stuart Mill has written the biggest defense on liberty, and he wanted to give an absolute right of freedom of expression to the citizens. And he has given a huge account of to allow people to speak whatever they want to. And he was talking in terms of falsehood or the truth. And he said that even if the people are speaking falsehood, still that carries values because the value of the truth increases in the presence of falsehood. So if the person is speaking the truth, well and good. If the person is speaking falsehood, even then there's some value in that. And the value is to increase the value of the truth. So he or she must be allowed to speak. So going from that idea, we can guess that John Stuart Mill would allow all these business of all sort of comedies and the roasting. But heinous language, obscene language, obviously he will not allow. There'll be limits to the offensive speech going by his harm principle. And by using offensive language, obviously you're harming psychologically, emotionally others. So there has to be a limit of that. But in general, comedy or roasting must be permissible. That is a position of these thinkers. Voltaire obviously will allow it. He wrote big defense of satire, and criticism of authority becomes effective through satire. However, all of them will come to this point but will not allow what happened recently on the show. If you talk of Nietzsche, Nietzsche idea was to overcome, rather reject the conventional morality. And in rejecting the conventional morality, the transgressive humor is permissible. And Nietzsche said that humor is permissible, obviously, and humor is effective in transgressing this conventional morality. Comedy can be the means to challenge the societal norms. And Nietzsche wanted to do that. His famous book, Beyond Good and Evil, wants us to go beyond the social standards of good and evil and develop the capability, actually. The idea is will to power. So he has not given his, obviously this is a new format. So the direct reference to roasting we don't have. We have references to comedy and satire in the literature. But we can second guess that he would in all likelihood support provocative comedy as the way to overcome the traditional moral constraints. But none of them will go too far to support the language that some of the comedians are using. Albert Camus, his idea is of absurdity. The life is filled with absurdity. And humor can take up a role in helping us coping our life filled with absurdity. There is obviously limit to the rational restrictions. There's limit to rationality. And rationality cannot explain all these absurdities of life. That is the general idea of existentialism. It cannot explain. Comedy can be the rebellion against the absurdity of life. The dark humors can be the philosophical response to the absurdity of life. So, dark humors, satire, comedy, they have been allowed by philosophers, thinkers, and rather they have been suggested to be very effective tools from all the way from Aristotle to Nietzsche to Albert Camus, all of them. So that's one part, but that is not what we are discussing in the context. When the video has been down from the YouTube, obviously it has clearly violated the norms of the platform. But coming this far is one thing, and going beyond this, using obscene language, that is completely different thing. There's a very famous quote of Emily Dickinson, a very celebrated US poetess, Emily Dickinson. She has said, "Words are all we have." And hence she emphasized on the sacred nature of language, suggesting that the vulgar words would diminish the most precious tools of expression that we have. Words are very, very important, very important. In the language game theory of Wittgenstein, we must respect social boundaries. Comedy's linguistic limits should align with the societal meaning-making structures. It's a complex theory. It's a very, very complex theory. But we must respect. We must respect when we use a language, it has to be used very effectively. That Noam Chomsky also has said that language shapes our thoughts pattern. The words that we use, the choice of the phrases. It's very, very important to control your language. With everything that we see, the mental models are created with things that we express. And that permanently affects our psychology. Normalizing vulgarity in comedy can degrade public discourse and our cognitive frameworks. And that in no cost must be regularized, must not be permissible. According to George Orwell, the degradation of language reflects and promotes the degradation of thoughts in society. You must have heard the quote, "Man is but the product of his thought, what he thinks he becomes." The mental models that we have in our mind, our thinking, our thought process, that is most fundamental thing, very, very fundamental thing that gives us experiences, that helps interpret the information that we hold. And that develops the cognitive attitude. Along with the thoughts and experience, emotions also comes, that develops the affective component of attitude. And that decides the behavior. So we have to control our thoughts, and thoughts come from the things that we say, from our speech. And Jay Austen, in his work, How to Do Things with Words, from that idea we can draw that comedy, the words used there, and the speech acts as real consequences and has social impacts. Man is but the product of his thought. Basically, in all these theories, the linkage between thought and then from there, emotions, from these two, attitude, and from attitude, behavior. And hence Gandhi said, "A man is but the product of his thought, what he thinks he becomes." It's very important. According to Charles Taylor, language expresses and shape our moral frameworks. So comedy words influence collective ethical understanding. Gen Zs, many of them who support that, they are on a really, really perilous path that is simply cannot be sanctioned from the understanding of psychology. The words does leave the permanent impact on our psychology, and we must be very careful when we speak things, and hence the phrase in English language, Mind your words. The third article that we are going to take up is on artificial intelligence. Prime Minister Modi is in France for the summit on artificial intelligence. He also has in his speech mentioned that if you ask AI to develop a picture of a man holding pen in left hand, it will not do it. Although on Twitter, someone has highlighted that one of the AI does it, but most of the AI will create a picture of man holding the pen in the right hand. And that Prime Minister Modi has highlighted as a limits of the AI. And he has said that the AI will never replace humans. That part may be right, that AI may not completely replace humans, but suggesting that since AI is not drawing the picture with man holding the pen in the right hand, that is a limitation. That's not a limitation on the ability of AI. That's a limitation on the way the AI has been trained. That's a bias that AI has. Bias that people hold pen in right hands. It's a bias. It's not a limitation. If AI learns by the training, or it may learn by itself as well through your feedback, it will start creating pictures of a man holding the pen in the left hand. That's no limitation on AI. Never mind the statement of the Prime Minister that AI will never replace human beings. That may be right in the context of this question that UPSC has asked in 2024. Application of artificial intelligence as a dependable source of input for administrative, rational decision making is a debatable issue. Critically examine the statement from the ethical point of view. The question is that the application of artificial intelligence as a dependable source of input for administrative, rational decision making is a debatable issue. So, for rational decision making, how reliable is AI? That's the question. Before I answer the question for you, the topic of decision making is one of the favorite in UPSC. In 2024, this question we are seeing on the question that we are about to discuss that is based on rational decision making, but there are many other questions that UPSC has asked. Some of them are presented here. In 2021, UPSC has asked this question: impact of digital technology as reliable source of input for rational decision making is debatable issue. And the language is strikingly similar. You can't help but notice that. Here they are asking about AI. Here they were asking about the digital technology as a reliable source of input, dependable source of input. Quite the same thing. Is debatable issue. Same thing. In 2013, they have talked about ethical decision making in the context of emotional intelligence. You see, discussion of 2015, that's also based upon decision making. Discussion of 2024, another question from the same paper, ethical decision making in the context of the normative ethics. Ethical decision making. So decision making, if you just search in the PYQ, decision making, you'll find many questions based upon this. So we have to first understand what is this process of decision making. Decision making process can be segregated into 4 steps. Gathering of the moral data. There has to be moral data input so that you can process for decision. To decide or to solve a problem, there has to be recognition of the problem. So you have to gather the data from all the sides to understand what the problem is. What are you dealing with? So the first step in decision making is to understand the scenario so that you can have an informed decision. So moral data input, this is the first step. And then the second step is processing. We can process it immediately based on our intuition, and we can process it thoroughly, more robustly, using our reasoning and conscience. These two are the most important processor of ethics. These are the brain of ethics. And once you have processed it, you have understood the scenario, we have looked at the possible options. And in the possible options, you have seen the pros and cons, and you have gathered that these are the options and these are the possible pros and cons of the options. From that analysis, when you choose one option, or you choose the sequence of few options, or to say course of action, when you have a final plan that this is what I am going to do, that is the output of the decision making. And that element in us that help us decide or choose the most moral course of action that is referred to as wisdom. That is wisdom. For example, if we talk about the interferences that human activity causes in the ecologically fragile areas, and in your analysis, you can see the importance of conservation of environment and ecology. Similarly, you can also see the importance of job creation, the importance of social support system for the locals, the importance of tourism for economy. But these are your analysis for different options, whether you're going to support economy or you're going to support society or you're going to support environment. There will be different pros and cons. But once you have done the analysis and you have finally taken a call, you have taken a decision, what is to be done, where you call that sustainable tourism, whatever that plan is, that is wisdom. It will not be wise to shut down the area for the tourist altogether, but it will be wise to regulate certain things that should not be done. For example, making too many structures of concretes, or maybe the mud houses be allowed. Things like that. Maybe sustainable, eco-friendly resorts be allowed, but too many structures should not be made. Or some restrictions on the number of footfalls. That will take care of both the things. But that will come from analysis. When you understand the importance of all the options, then you can pick and choose and balance the options among them. Or you can take the most important option from them. Whatever it is in your wisdom that should be done now, that concrete plan in your hand, that is the output of the decision, and that will come from wisdom. And once you have decided, you got to implement it. And implementation is never going to be easy. Never. There'll be resource crunches. And for that, you have to come with innovative ideas, creativity, out of the box thinking, imagination as to how, in the limited resources, you will be implementing the idea. The idea may not be acceptable immediately to everyone. So you have to show your leadership skills, your communication skills, your persuasion skills to get people on board, develop the moral coherence, and finally implement it by that force. So these are the 4 broad steps of decision making: data gathering, data processing, data output, and the decision implementation. Data gathering, data processing, the decision making, finally, that is through wisdom, and the decision implementation. So these are the 4 stages of decision making. Question is, how reliable is AI? How reliable is AI? That can be discussed in different stages of decision making. How reliable is AI with regard to data gathering? With regard to data gathering, AI could be reliable in some certain sense and may not be reliable in certain sense. For example, AI is Google's DeepMind. Many of the AI, they very accurately gather the data concerning cancer. Cancer detection has been done successfully by many of the AIs. Many AIs. Weather forecast, traffic data management. In these things, the AI can excel. Perception of the data and gathering the data at the right time from different locations, that can be held by AI. But however, gathering the data on the emotional cues, gathering the data that is sensitive to the culture, the aspirations of the tribals, or the lack of hemoglobin in the women, increasing rate of anemia in the women, lack of aspirations, fulfillment in the women and the children. AI data cannot be based on collection of emotions. AI doesn't know emotion yet, and maybe never it will know about it. Never. Because human beings have the capacity to feel things. AI may not get there ever. So the collection of data in that sense will be very restricted. The data can be biased, like the face recognition system performing poorly on the darker skin tones. And so in the data collection, picking positive emotion has not been the forte of AI. And perhaps, maybe, hopefully, in the best interest of humanity, AI will never get there. But as with regard to collection of data, broad ranges of data, there AI will excel. Clearly, it will excel. With regard to processing, AI can enhance our ability to process. Like the Compass AI in the US courts recommended harsher sentences for minority defendants. An AI system in the US hospital prioritized younger patients over elderly ones for the COVID-19 treatment. When it comes to decision making concerning empathy, concerning Sarvodaya through Antyodaya, concerning the idea of John Ruskin unto the last, concerning trusteeship of Gandhi, that AI will not be able to do. But to process the data bereft of emotions, there AI will do exceedingly well. In processing of data, just the raw data, bereft of emotions, that AI will do exceedingly well without bringing emotions, consistently deciding certain things based upon standards and standards alone. That AI will do exceedingly well without deviation because of any emotions. AI can help us simulate multiple scenarios in planning, in disaster management, etc. AI can identify a very complex pattern and can be excelling too much in establishing the correlations. For example, in maybe the genome sequencing, where you have to do with numbers and patterns, you don't have to do with emotions. In that kind of processing, AI will do exceedingly well, exceedingly well. But when it comes to using emotions and favoring the vulnerable section in the decision making, there AI will not excel. Now, what is the meaning of rational decision making? Rational decision making does not mean decision making based on facts alone. Rational decision making is same as ethical decision making. According to Kant, rationality rationality is equal to morality. So rational decision making for the purpose of our course is same as ethical decision making. It is just the same. So ethical decision making requires favoring the vulnerable section. It does. From all the ever known theories of philosophy, we know that. We know the difference principle of John Rawls. You have to favor the vulnerable section, the least well off in society. We know from the Gandhi's trusteeship principle. We know the idea of unto the last. We know Sarvodaya through Antyodaya. You have done your social justice in GS2. In social justice, the mention of vulnerable section is there. It's the idea of equity, fairness of Aristotle. It's the idea of equity of Indian Constitution. So you don't have to really work like computer, just base things based on facts and algorithms. Algorithms won't work. You require sensitivity in decision making too, and there artificial intelligence and that kind of decision making won't do well. It won't do well. With regard to wisdom, with regard to having a plan of action, once the decision has been made, AI can be very effective in that. Once you have decided that you have to do certain things, for example, maybe you have decided that you have to have Indra Awas Yojana for the rural region. That's an ethical decision making. And once that has been decided, how will it be implemented? How the funds can be used? How many houses in the sanctioned amount of fund? Which are the regions which will be better for procurement of resources? And all the implementation aspects. And that will be done very well, very well by AI. With regard to imagination, there could be limited ability in genuine leadership and limited ability to think things out of the box. AI will bring creativity in problem solving. AI can help in coming up with new ideas. AI also has helped in development of many of the APIs. AI has helped in development of some of the generic medicines as well. AI has helped in the discovery of some of the important molecules in the medicine industry. So the imagination actually can come through AI, but AI will be very limited in its ability of leadership, in getting people on board, getting the team do the job, inspiring and motivating people. That element in AI will be restricted. So AI has the bright side and AI has the limitation. And that is the position of AI with regard to rational decision making. What we should do is where AI can help us, we must take the help, and rest of the job must be done by humans. Rather, we should be looking for human AI collaborations. There should be diversity in the development of any platform based on AI so that the biasness can be checked in the programming and the training. the source code for the AI must be released so that we really know how is it working. The source code is the brain of any program. It tells us the functionalities of any program. If the source code is released, we know exactly what it is doing and how it is thinking, what is the algorithm. If the source code is known, then the amount of training and the maybe some inherent biasness that can also be identified. So working transparently will help. Regular audits of the AI system for checking the biasness and the fairness, the ethic audit, that can be instituted. There should be strong data protection and privacy measures because of the data collection using big data analytics and artificial intelligence. There should be clear ethical guidelines for the use of AI in administration. People must be continuously educated and trained for the better use, especially in administration, and develop the capabilities in using AI and understand their limitations as well, not become slave of AI and blindly use it everywhere. And continuous dialogues will open the window and bring the suggestions as to how effectively use AI in governance in general, also in rational decision making, on which the question is. AI is a fact, it's a technology of our time, and it's not going anywhere. Technology always moves in a single direction. It is not to be retracted. It's never going to go away. So it is wise to understand how to effectively use them.